Okay, looks like we're good. Welcome everyone to the NPM Open RFC meeting for Wednesday, May 11th, 2022. This is a meeting where we bring up ideas, issues, plans, and discuss the future of the NPM CLI. So I just want to point out that we do have a code of conduct for these meetings, and for it applies to issues in all communications in the community. Today we have an agenda to go over a bunch of RRFC discussions and some feature discussions, and hopefully we can make progress on those, give status updates, and we'll take some notes and keep moving forward. I don't have any announcements. Does anybody have any announcements today? Anything they want to share? Hearing none, let's dive right in. So the first item on the agenda is RRFC number 581, add message or opt-out support for non-registry tarballs. And so just quick summary. I don't think, well, Owen, you're here. Owen,
yeah,
yours. So do you want to give a quick summary?
Hello. Sure. So this came up a few meetings ago, adjacent, I forget the issue at the time. I think it was maybe some other security related issue, but out of that, there was a comment that seemed worthy of tracking, which was basically if any package or dependency, direct or otherwise, in the tree does not come from a registry, it would be good to inform, to some varying degrees, the person or the user running, I guess at first glance, like npm install with just, message, and from there it could, escalate to with options to, failing, or, whatever boundaries you want to put around it. But at the very least, could at least in a non-breaking way surface a message saying, hey, you might not know it, but there's a mutable package in your dependency tree. It doesn't come from a registry. Not as verbose as how I'm saying it, but you get the gist. So yeah, basically, in short, be able to warn and or fail or potentially opt out from being able to install any dependency that does not come from a registry, npm, or obviously any internal registry. Yeah.
Okay.
And hopefully I captured the sentiment right at the time. So that's what I recall, and so that's the draft that I got in the issue.
Cool. So I noticed, Jordan, you had some clarifying opinions on direct dependencies and sort of levels of failure. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sorry, let me pull up the context.
I'll throw the link in chat here.
This is 581 or?
Yeah, this is 581.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, okay. So essentially, my overall philosophy is on things that are actionable for me, meaning things that live in my package JSON only, NPM should warn me as much as possible when I'm doing something subpar, should have options to let me opt into blocking me when I do something subpar, and then maybe future majors can make that the default, right? And that's awesome because that's actionable for me. If I see a warning, I can fix it, or I can ignore it, or I can, I don't know, I can deal with it. When it's a problem from a transitive dependency, I think NPM should shut up about it by default. Nobody should ever see that because it's not actionable for them. That's not their dependency. They don't own that code. Even when it's my own module in my dependency graph, like that's a different me, and it's that me's problem. It's not this me's problem, right? So I would very much love to enable something in all my projects and all of my, coworkers, like my company's projects, that says you cannot directly depend on anything except a registry version. No git deps, no tarball deps directly, because that's actionable. But it would be almost useless, especially in like my company's large repos or something, and replace my company with my current company or any of my former companies. Like it would be useless to warn me about those intransitive dependencies, because the likelihood that something would appear that I would be unable to do anything about is very high. And the only recourse then is either I just turn off the warning, it's now useless, or I am allowed to configure it in such a granular way as I can ignore that one violation and still retain the rest. And that's awesome, but that's a very large increase in complexity for configuration and maintenance of NPM. So that's like where my overall philosophy comes in general. And then I applied it to this for my comments.
I think the only, I guess, depending on your definition of actionable, about the transitive dependency, well, I agree in philosophy about the immediate actionability of the transparency of that notification. It's not necessarily 100% inactionable, because in theory, you could at least open an issue on the offending package and perhaps persuade them to, past that. Yes, I get it. It's probably, getting into a rabbit hole, but
I'm talking about
the transparency
defaults, right?
At least. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like I am also totally fine with a way to explicitly opt in to seeing warnings about transitive dependencies, but it should never be the default, because anybody who knows how to turn that on also probably knows how to talk to maintainers without being entitled, time leeches about it. When it's a default, then maintainers get 17 duplicate issues filed full of arrogance and entitlement, and that is not good for anybody. So yeah, like I would also be fine with something that says, hey, I want to turn this on and see if any of my dependency graph is using tarballs, because then maybe I can figure out how to work around that. But I would want me, the infrastructure engineer, to be able to do that and not have any of the product engineers see that, because that's none of their concern. They don't have the expertise to evaluate that potentially.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, to be able to just add a flag, to see that, or a command or an audit or whatever, and just know that that's an issue for some transitive dependencies. So maybe not necessarily during install by default, at least for V8, V9.
I think Jordan made a point that, I guess in terms of kind of negotiating maybe that's part of the discussion is, what's the behavior by default for direct versus transitive? I think the case being, say someone submits a PR and updates your direct dependencies, that's something that, to Jordan's point, you could opt out of, fail the PR, and then someone knows right at the time they submit a PR, if you got something like CI going, that, hey, we don't, that's not part of our workflow, and the discussion could happen there. So I guess that could be part of the discussion is, like Jordan alluded to, if that's not confusing, a different behavior or too complex for, one versus the other. I'm, impartial either way. I just think it's a good idea to be able to get that level of transparency, if it takes an extra flag, and so be it. But I think it's good to have it there in some capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know that, right? Like I said, even on my entire graph, I would love the ability to quickly check, like, is there anything in here that doesn't come from the registry? Because like, I want to pay attention to that. I just wouldn't want that to be on by default. That's all, except for direct dependencies. I think it's awesome to turn that on for directs by default if we want, like, for the reasons mentioned.
Yeah, and I think it's consistent with the discussion we had on the deprecation refactor, right? That we want to work on. I think we say the same thing, yeah.
There's also potential, like this is something that the selector syntax, like this is something that we should make sure the selector syntax is capable of seeing, perhaps. Filtering by.
Well,
yeah, you'd have to have a way to target a dependency and then like like a category of, like, say, like you'd have to be able to say like registry tarball get, file link, I don't know, whatever the options are.
Right.
So that, like, we could do that, but that's a little more complex than was probably intended.
Okay. I think we've got pretty good consensus there. Does anybody have any +1s or -1s on this? Okay.
+1 with the caveats mentioned.
Okay, let's move on then. I believe next in the agenda is RRFC 548, add flag to running NPM commands in transitive dependencies. So I don't believe that Zachary's here. So the gist of this is that Lerna will run scripts. So when you run a script on a workspace in Lerna, it will check to see if there are dependents, so dependencies that depend on this package within your workspaces, and run the script there first. So, as Lerna is being deprecated and the NPM CLI supports more and more workspace features and use cases, this might be something that we want to include. So
we talked about this a bit last week too. I think I think there's kind of two related features here, and one is like the having NPM implicitly in workspaces figure out a dependency tree and like serialize the things that it knows need to be serialized automatically. And then a related feature is like, I want to target one package and then also tell NPM, hey, also run this script in all of the other workspace packages that it depends on. And those are two like different features that both require NPM to have computed the dependency graph within the workspace.
Yep.
And like there's use cases, I think, for both of them. And then like Darcy's comment at the end of this is about Wiret, and Wiret is a few different concepts bundled together, but one of those concepts is the makefile like automatic dependency ordering that I think NPM should be doing. So I don't know, I mean, this exact RFC is probably just for the automatically figure out the transitive dependencies part, but like, I feel like all two or three of these things, the third being like better NPM scripts, which is Wiret, like, or what Wiret's trying for, like all three of those are heavily related because NPM needs to like, they all depend on NPM knowing the workspace dependency graph and ordering them first.
Yep. That makes sense to me. Any other comments, thoughts? I missed last week's meeting, so thanks for the context, Jordan. Yeah, I think this is something we definitely want to work on and keep pushing forward. So Yeah, because you're right. There's going to be a few things that need that logic. So we could start there. Let's move on. Next on the agenda is RFC 546, cleanup file ownership story. And this was a discussion, I believe, that Roy started. So do you want to give a quick summary, Roy?
Yeah, I can start, but I believe the right person, or at least the person I want to hear talking about it, is Nilf, who's here.
Yeah,
So
I can talk about this one.
Yeah, I saw you dropped a couple of comments there and a fancy mermaid graph. So if you want to talk about those.
Fancy diagram, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so starting just quickly from the beginning, one of the things that NPM does currently is if you run a command as root, it tries to determine the ownership of the directory that it's writing files into and inherit that automatically. This has some problems, especially with things like global installs, where we sometimes occasionally try to change the permissions of your entire global bin directory, which is rarely the right thing to do. The reason this exists was to help users avoid situations where they end up with files that are owned by root, either in their project or in like their cache in their home directory. Which I mean is an interesting goal, but I think the more appropriate thing to do is to not do that automatically, right? There's no reason that we shouldn't we should inform users that what they're doing could write files under the wrong owner, but we should not stop them from doing it. And we certainly shouldn't force files that are written as root to be owned by a different user. So solving this problem, though, in a non-breaking way could be kind of tricky, which is where that mermaid graph came in. The common use case is, say, a Docker container, right? Where you're running all of your commands as root, because that's a thing that a lot of people still do. So out of the box, by default, we can't just say things like, if you're root, just exit, because that completely breaks that workflow. So the idea behind this graph was to kind of try to more reasonably infer things, but also do so in such a way that you can tell it not to change ownership of anything. I also want to, as part of this, make the change instead of writing the file and then changing the owner of the file. We should be doing set UID or set GID within the NPM process. That way the files are just written by the right person in the first place. So that's kind of the gist of this. And the idea is, you know, when we can infer that you're root and you're probably wanting things written by someone else, maybe we can try to do the right thing. Like in the case of sudo, there are environment variables that will tell us who the original UID and GID is. But in Docker, we don't have that advantage. So I don't know if that's something we would need to figure out. A short-term thing would be, as one of the comments on this issue suggests, is just having a flag to disable that behavior entirely. That's a thing that we can add fairly quickly.
Yep. All right. Any questions or comments?
I have a very basic one.
Sure.
Remind me, does this apply only to Unix systems or Windows at all?
Nope, does not apply to Windows. Windows doesn't have process.getUID or setUID or any of those related functions. So we don't do anything there. If you're running as a different user in Windows, you're already on your own.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't have any performance differences, because I know that like attribute lookups on NTFS are very expensive. In
Windows currently, no, we do not have a performance problem because of this. In POSIX systems, we very much do.
Right.
Because every time we write a file, we then do stat calls walking up the tree until we find an owner that's not root, and then we change the ownership. And in some cases, we change the ownership not of just the one file that we wrote, but of the entire directory. So this is potentially a lot of stat and chown calls.
So is it so the entire set of problems is only when you're running as root?
As root.
Or
Yep. As
okay, so
root.
if you're running as a regular user, there's currently no one is impacted.
Correct.
Okay.
But this is a big part of why we've had issues come up that installs and Docker containers are very slow. This is a very common part of that, because especially if you're using like a shared between the host and the container file system, the file system within Docker containers is very slow, and those stat and chown calls are very expensive.
And you're much more likely to be running as root.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the Docker performance implications are pretty big here.
Yeah. Yeah, and first steps for this, I feel like a flag to disable that behavior entirely, and a flag to specify an exact UID and GID to use.
Mm-hmm.
I think those two things would get us a good chunk of the way there, but then we still need to go through and remove all of that inferring code eventually, I feel.
Right. So we could start, I mean, how would we introduce that change in a major, and would there be a multi-phase deprecation of some sort where
I
we
think
start
so.
warning?
I think that would be the path, right? Is we add the flag to disable the behavior, then we add a warning log if we are changing permissions of something, so people are aware that it's even happening.
Right.
And then we can later turn that into we just don't do that anymore. So those log messages will go away, and instead you'll get files that aren't owned by you. And we shouldn't be trying to solve operating system and file system issues for people. We're making a lot of assumptions there. That's not a good idea.
Okay.
I mean, I think it would be awesome to tell them an exact npm doctor command that would solve it for them.
Yes.
Like it's fine to do the work for them, to like tell them it's fine to do the work for them as long as it's not like silently doing it.
Right.
Like if you're telling them how to ask for npm to just fix it, they shouldn't need to know the arcane details of fixing it, but they should, they should have to ask for that.
Yep.
Ideally.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree. And today, npm doctor does already check the permissions of like your local project directory, your cache directory. It does not give you helpful information for what to do if one of those checks fails. So that is definitely something we should add. And then on top of that, we can do things like if we get, an eperm error thrown somewhere, we can check the ownership of the directory and say, oh, it looks like we're trying to write into a directory that's not owned by your user.
So this is maybe a slight tangent, but so are there npm doctor subcommands like that? Like it seems useful, if it's not already there, for npm doctor to be a shortcut for all the 17 individual npm doctor A, B, C, D, E commands, and each one like has help output that tells me exactly what it's going to do, and then like or a dry run command that tells me exactly what's going to do or whatever, and in that way we could tell people run npm doctor A134, and then like it doesn't matter what that means, they can use that to figure out what it's going to do. They can do it manually if they want, right? Like and then all of the fixing behavior can be moved into npm doctor and granularly targeted from the place that would normally do it.
Yeah, I agree. That is how it should work. Today, no, we don't have that. npm doctor just runs all of the checks blindly, but that is absolutely something we should do, is break up doctor into individual commands.
Yeah, and we've been discussing a doctor refactor.
Yeah.
On and off. That seems like.
Yeah, and that feels like a thing that we can do iteratively too. Like npm doctor with no subcommand can continue running all of the checks, and we can just start adding the commands for the individual checks.
Yeah. Okay. think we're done there. Let's move on to RRFC 539, security audit lock files for injection. So I started this conversation, and it spawned from an issue I came across, where this individual had pointed out it for NPM and PNPM and Yarn, that a malicious person could edit a lock file to replace packages or package tarballs, and basically mangle things from a security perspective. So we had some back and forth about, like, when is this an issue? What can we do about it? And I believe Nelf did some changes to the default install or CI behavior.
Yes, we will make sure that your tree is valid before we attempt to preify it on disk for you.
Right, and by valid you mean you check against the package JSON and the package lock to make sure they're
Correct.
sync.
Yep. If the package lock and the package JSON disagree, however, this is not going to do things like make sure that the integrity value is correct. It only makes sure that the shape of the tree is correct, as in the right named nodes at the right versions are in the right places.
How can one verify that?
Verify what? The
Like-
integrity?
Yeah, like it seems like it would be ideal if there was one command that I could run in CI that said everything is as it should be and no one is doing anything shady.
Yeah, and those are checks that we can add as we go. This was the first pass, was just making sure the shape of the tree is valid. And from there, we can continue adding things like, well, let's also make sure that the integrity values are real. Let's make sure, we're not sending the wrong tarball URLs as the resolve values, that sort of thing.
Okay, can you update that conversation then, Nelf, with the changes so far?
Yep, will do.
Okay, let's move on. And I think the next item is issue 479, breaking change. Bin command should not return non-existent paths. So the summary on this is that the bin command can sometimes list paths that don't exist. If there's no node modules.bin, it can still show it. And so there was a suggestion of a strict flag or some other configuration to prevent this problem. There's discussion on that, some tools being reliant on this behavior for populating path environment variable. And yeah, I was just wondering if anyone had any questions or comments on this particular issue.
So even though I pointed out that someone might be adding npm bin output to path, like people do that all over the place for a decade. But I think it's a terrible idea and they shouldn't ever do it. So like, I'm not sad about breaking it, but we should at least be aware that that's the breakage we'd be getting into. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not even actually sure. Like the only use case I can think of for using npm bin that isn't that would be if npx didn't exist and you wanted to pretend it did, you would just temporarily prepend that to your path and then do your command. But npx exists. And if there's any reason why someone doesn't want to use npx for that, like they're worried about it installing, or I don't know, then we should add an npx feature so that they don't have to worry about that. And then nobody needs npm bin anymore. So like, and I think even the newest versions of npx don't install by default, right? I don't know, but there's probably something there that like where we could add a flag to npx that was like, please only consider locally installed bins, right, and don't allow anything else. And then you just do npx -- local or something, your thing, and then it just works. And then why does npm bin need to exist again, like anymore? So that, I don't know, I don't know if anyone has any use cases for npm bin besides those two things, but like, yeah, exactly, Darcy, that something like that would be fine. But if those are the only two use cases for npm bin, like npx obviates one of them and best practices obviate the other, like maybe we just delete it.
Nelf?
Yeah, I was actually just going to say what Darcy put in chat just now. The -- location flag, that's exactly what the intended purpose of that for is. We're going to spread that to npx so you can tell it, run the bin from here. And if it's not there, then, we'll prompt you to install it in that location or whatever we need to do. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think making npx do the right things and the expected things is the way to fix this. And this is another one that as to transition, we can deprecate it and log a warning and then remove it in a future sub or major.
How would we log a warning on a change in behavior for a feature rather than a configuration item or a command?
I think we could still do it, right? Like we know what the directory is. We can throw in a thing that just does a quick stat. And if it's not actually a directory, then we just add that to the output, right? Like log a warning that says, this is what your bin directory will be if you happened to install something that would create a bin directory, but it's not there right now.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds like we should update that. Let's move on to the next item in the agenda, unless anybody has anything else. Okay. The next one is 575. Run script with workspaces should short circuit on script error. And let's see. So I think this one is pretty self-evident by the title. Right now, running scripts across multiple workspaces can produce, non-exit codes of 0, but it'll still run the next script or the next workspace. And so this would short circuit that so that if any script failed, it would prevent it would prevent the next workspace from running the script. There was a suggestion of maybe a short circuit flag or something like that. So does anybody have any thoughts or questions? I know, Darcy, you've had the last comment on this one.
Sorry, I'm like half distracted here. For once, I'm
you're
not
fine.
running the show, so I get to be out there. I see Jordan's got his hand up, though. So.
Oh yeah, Jordan.
Sure. So I think that if npm run in workspaces automatically ordered all of the things, then the short circuiting behavior would be the only way it could possibly work. Because if it ran A and then B and C and then D or something, you
Right.
can't run B and C until A succeeds, and you can't run D until B and C succeed, and so on. And so that's the only way it would work. And I suspect that if that existed, this person's use case would already be met.
Yeah.
Because if you're running tests in two projects that don't depend on each other, you probably don't want to short circuit them. The only reason you'd want to short circuit them is because the second one depends on the first one. And you don't want to waste time running the second when the first has failed. And that's what the ordering thing would already give you.
Right.
I guess my only comment to that is like beyond tests, beyond build, like, does that apply equally to all other types of scripts that could exist, right? Like, let's say I happen to have some random arbitrary script name that I'm execute. Is the expectation that you're going to run all of the throughout the dependency chain, like tree and graph, like you're going to essentially run each one of those, that arbitrary script, right? Like by default, like just because we have this concept of build specifically or test specifically that we want to run the tests of every, like.
So I have an answer to that. So let's say there's these two modes, right? There's topological sorting, which thank you. I think whoever said that in the chat, that's, yeah, Nathan, thank you. That's the term for it. Topological sorting, or what, parallel, right? Sorting, whether it runs concurrently or not is irrelevant, but like it's either like all for, a free for all, or it's topologically sorted. If you just pick topological by default, then in the case where they aren't actually dependent on each other, like let's say it's a script that just says like echo, npm package get name, right? It just prints out the name or something, right? There's no dependency issue there. You could run them all in any order, it doesn't matter. So if you choose topological sorting for something like that, the worst thing that happens is that it completes a little slower in a still deterministic order, but it still all completes correctly. That's fine. Slow and correct is not broken. It's just maybe not ideal, right? But if you choose the other one by default, a lot of things will be broken because they won't be run in the correct order. So my proposal or suggestion is to run topologically by default and then offer a flag to npm run that chooses the free-for-all mode. So if you happen to know that it is safe to run this without non-topologically, then great, opt into it, go nuts, right? But that's not a safe default. In other words, the current behavior is not a safe default because there's many use cases where it just doesn't do the right thing.
Yeah, I just feel.
Go ahead, Darcy. No, you.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to like I've been looking at like the various tools, build tooling that has been coming out in the last couple of years. They are explicitly creating these relationships and these pipelines and dependencies, and very explicitly saying when you want to execute whatever script, you create like essentially you want to create the relationships there. I totally understand that we already have an understanding of how dependencies are of your dependency tree, like, and we can execute this for you. But for me, I feel like this is like overreaching in terms of like a new capability to run, let's say, all of it, like again, even in topological order, run all the tests for the entire, like all the way up to
to be clear, I'm not talking about changing which child workspaces are included, right? Like if you ran,
it's just for workspaces. This is not like I go through my dependencies. Okay, this is different than what I've been considering.
I'm only talking about workspaces, and I'm only talking about within the set of child workspaces that you have selected.
Right.
I'm arguing that by default they should be sorted topologically and short-circuited when a slice fails, right? Like, and by sorted, like you're gonna have chunks, right? Of like, and basically anything that where a precondition for it has failed should be short-circuited, right? As you would expect, it's how make works. It's like the intuitive thing. And then if the script you are running on the set of child workspaces you have chosen, which could be all of them or a group or whatever, if you know in your mind that it's safe to run them all at once, then you pass an extra flag to npm run, and then it runs them all at once, and you get slightly better performance because you have explicitly opted out of the safe default. But yeah, certainly it wouldn't touch anything inside node modules. That's not your code.
Okay, great. Then I'm +1. I think I understand. That was like one of the things in my mind that was. Yeah.
And I would even assume the learn a transitive dependencies flag thing. I could be wrong here, but I don't think that touches anything inside node modules either. That means transitive workspace dependencies of the workspaces you've selected. So that flag to me is about starting with a set of child workspaces and automatically expanding that to include every other transitive child workspace in that repo, but like still never including anything in node modules because that's bonkers.
Okay, great.
Right.
That's exactly what that was the maybe incorrect assumption in my head that was making me like get my spidey senses up.
Yeah, because a lot of those scripts would require dev dependencies anyway. So yeah. Cool. Well, I think that gives us pretty clear direction on this, and it's directly related to the other RFCs. So maybe we should link them.
Or maybe not. I mean, this is if we're just talking about the flag to short circuit, right?
Well, yeah, if we're just
Yeah.
talking about, but I mean, we're talking about the behavior to short circuit, but this is referring um, to some sort of implied behavior for ordering as well, right? So the topological sorting, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's just that even without it, like we could add the the flag and just quit executing as long as you gotta fail, right? You can have it there.
Right.
But of course, it makes more sense. It's going to be better with the topological order.
I would be afraid that would give us bugs issued since there's no canonical order in that kind of scenario. So yeah, but we could certainly change behavior to fail fast under a flag.
Yes. I think also like the fact that you can set workspaces, like the order of workspaces by providing them as flags. Yeah. And then, also gives you some capabilities there. Like there's no contract right now for the ordering when you aren't specifically defining them that way, right? So like technically we could implement the topological sorting and then introduce this new flag to fail early.
Yeah.
Right. But I do suspect that if we had the topological sorting, which would have to be short circuiting, like the demand for a short circuit flag would change, and it would be worth spending some time to reevaluate that before deciding to implement it. Because it may turn out not to be necessary. And if it's still necessary, we've lost a little time and then we just add it. My thinking anyway.
But you're saying to fail by default, right? To fail early by default.
When using topological sorting, which I think should be the default, but that's a slightly separate discussion. When using topological sorting, a failure in a task must always short circuit every other task that depends on it.
Oh,
so that's not the behavior today, right? That's breaking change, which is why we can use
breaking change. Yeah, that's a breaking change.
So let's just say for now, we add a flag to npm run where you select the mode and it defaults to the current behavior, and you can opt into topological sorting. Okay, when you opt into topological sorting, that's the way what I described is how it would have to work, because like it just wouldn't make sense to run a script after it's like if the things that are necessary for it to exist haven't completed successfully, right? And so you wouldn't need a short circuit flag in that mode. It would just be the behavior. Then in a future Semver major, maybe we could make that the default npm run mode. But then this request is sort of saying, when you're running all at once, a bunch of tasks in conceptual parallel, whichever one fails first, I want to kill the entire process. And that's what they're asking for. And that could still be added for that mode only, and it would be fine. But like, I suspect that if the topological sorting mode existed, that would just completely subsume their use case, and there wouldn't be any need for a short circuit flag anymore. And I could be wrong, in which case we could still add it. But if I'm right and we add it, then it can't be taken away as easily. So anyway, this is a bunch of suppositions for me, right? And obviously at any of them I could be wrong, but my intuition is that that's how it would play out if we implement it in that order.
Basically, that topological order implies a hierarchy, and that hierarchy is desired for a reason. I want to build my component library before I build my front end, before I run my tests for everything. And if my component library fails, then I can't test my front end because all that code's broken.
And if my component library's tests fail, then my front end library's tests will probably fail too. So I'm not going to bother running them.
Topological is basically like a promise.race or something like that.
Well, yeah,
inverse promise.race.
It's promise.all settled is the current behavior.
That's what I'm thinking.
With the short circuit flag would be promise.all.
Yes.
And the topological sorting would be something that promises can't trivially represent, but is what I argue most people actually want. And talking about defaults and flags is a discussion I think we can all pretty straightforward go through, but like separate from what that mode would do.
Yeah, the nice thing about opt-in flags for everything is that we can reevaluate defaults in future Semver majors.
Right. And my suspicion is that if we provided this topological sort mode in an opt-in flag, is that the demand for it would be so large that everyone would prefer it become the default in V9, V10, or V, whatever. But obviously, like, we could wait to see what happens before committing to that.
In that case, that would make a great case for npm build becoming a top level command, right? Because everything I keep hearing is build, right? Like and then npm build essentially applies
build,
the
lint,
flag,
test,
right?
Yeah.
Applies that default flag, right? But npm run still stays essentially, you have to provide the flag, or you have to configure it with command specific configuration, right? But
I don't think build is the right term, because build is only one of the use cases that wants this. Like, linting and testing aren't building necessarily. And like, it could also be start. I want to do npm run start with this mode, because I want to start my database server successfully before I start my API server, before I start my front end, like, HTML server, right? And so, like, it's fine if you want to, like, if you'd prefer to, instead of adding a flag to run, if you'd prefer adding a new top level command, like, okay, sure, that's a bike shed, but I don't think build would be the term for it.
Because I know if you want a lint, you probably want to run them all at once and just bail out as soon as any of them fails. But then for your actual, like, say your end-to-end test, the topological order would make sense, because you can't hit the browser to your front end if it doesn't have the, so there's good cases for both, and having the bailout in either situation.
Right. Yeah, I'm just going to repeat that I think that in the case where you don't want the ordering, the worst case of having the ordering is that it's a little slower, but it still works perfectly fine. And so I think it is much better to force people to opt into a faster thing when they understand the caveats than it is to, force people to understand when there's danger.
And there's lower potential stakes in a lint versus like a whole kicking off the whole build pipeline, fail fast or fail early kind of thing.
But it could also be publish.
Yeah, that's true.
I would like to publish these things in the order. I want to publish the core before I publish the CLI, before I publish the, I don't know, something next thing. Like, there's just, there's a lot of things that, where you want to run commands in that order.
But I think your point about topological short circuiting by default as its default behavior makes a lot of sense. And then if you want to run in a parallel mode, you can throw another.
When I would say stronger, I would say it shouldn't be disableable. Like, it should only ever short circuit in topological mode, because nothing else makes sense. And if you don't want it to short circuit, you would bail out of topological mode entirely anyway.
Right.
Like,
So Nelf has his hand raised.
Sorry.
Sure. What if instead of doing like an implicit topological sorting where we assume that things that your package depends on need to build before, or whatever script it is, arbitrary script, this is a per script configuration effectively, right? So what if we had like a script metadata and you could just point blank say, this script needs this dependencies script to also have run first? Because then you get the current default behavior, but when you need those strict lines and you need to say, no, this has to finish first, then you can opt into that in a very detailed and prescriptive way for that one script.
I mean, I think it wouldn't be harmful to do that, but I also think that that's almost always the case. Like, the fact that I declared a dependency in package JSON is me saying that I want that dependency, like that I want that ordering. And so,
I just mean with regard to scripts specifically, because like you said, a build script, for sure, you probably want your dependencies to successfully build before you build your own. But what about, let's say, like a linting script?
Well, it would be the same. So I mean,
a lot of people don't care though. They just want to know, does it all
so that's fair, but then that's when I would opt out of the mode. I would be like, npm run -- mode equals free for all lint, because then I already know that the results don't depend in the ordering, and I want to run them in parallel, and that's fine. And then maybe in that case I would want a short I don't know whether I want to short circuit or not is sort of irrelevant. I would probably not, because as long as the final exit code was not a success, unless they were all right, as long as that worked, I would actually probably prefer all of the lint output. But like, but again, is that like if we were picking a default right now, like if we went with topological sorting and you ran the linting, the only negative consequence is it runs a little slower because it doesn't start some of the, all the lint jobs at the same time, but it still all completes correctly, right? And so like when the worst outcome is that it's a little slower, like we're doing good, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. It makes a sense in a lot of cases, but to be able to isolate it to the use cases where you want it, it seems to me like it's something that could live in the package JSON as part of a configuration for the script.
Which is why I think I mentioned Wire It, and then I know you brought that up to me. Actually, no, if you brought up Wire It, which has come out recently, and they're trying to essentially append some of the pipeline logic that Turbo Repo and Laga and some other monorepo tooling has come out with, and which is why I mentioned in chat that sometimes the dependency relationships do not map to these things, right? Like there's not like one-to-one with like if I want to spin up some sort of build, pipeline like tooling that I need to have my tests run and execute. I'm not defining these things explicitly. I don't know. I just used the one example of like my front end application running those tests and like a server application there, like potentially not direct, like have direct dependency or relationship, right? So I don't know.
All right, let's leave that there for now. So we have 3 more items on the agenda, but I don't believe we have time for them because we only have 1 minute left. I know all of these 3 things are yours, Darcy. Did you want to make any comment or request for participation in any of these?
Plead the 5th.
You plead the 5th.
As a Canadian, I plead the 5th.
Which one's the 5th in Canada?
I don't know what it is. I don't know what the Fifth Amendment is in the Canadian Constitution, our Charter of Rights and whatever we have here. I don't even know it. Roy probably knows it. The update is there is no real update. Myself and Roy are actually taking a bit of this afternoon to clean up NPM query, the NPM query RFC. So I guess that is a bit of an update. We're actually going to spend some time to like make progress here. So I apologize that we haven't done more until now. So, but we are actively still trying to keep up with these things, and we really do want to have something special to show at OpenJS World. So if we can do anything in that area specifically, NPM query or a command specific configuration before that time, I know we'll be excited to share that with folks, but that's about it.
Yeah, before we go, I will just also mention Owen. I think we forgot to mention at the end of when we talk about that first item, but you can go ahead and open an RFC. I think this is good. Yeah, I think a few of these RFCs we cover today are just like good to go. We should open proper RFCs.
Cool. I'll look to get that in for next week.
So I'd also like to note that at some point the stream was going when we started, and it has failed at some point. So I'm not sure what happened there. So
it says live in Zoom.
Yeah, and it was streaming,
right.
But when I just checked on it just now, it failed at some point. So anyway, thank you everyone.
Got strong opinions on topological sorting, perhaps.
Oh yeah, nobody saw our topological sorting takes. But we're at time, so I appreciate everyone showing up, participating, continuing to be involved in these discussions, both